The other night we went over some of the highlights about the question, optimal health or expensive urine. Now the fact is that there has been a lot of questionable reports in the media over the past few years that are almost designed to raise questions in the consumer's mind as to the effectiveness of supplementation. What is happening is really interesting because the supplement industry has grown to such an extent over the past decade or two. It is creating a paradigm shift in the world in terms of how people approach long-term health and preventive health. And quite frankly, it's starting to affect the profits of the pharmaceutical industry. So we're seeing a lot of studies come out today that are almost purposely designed to raise questions about whether or not supplements are truly effective. So the question raised, optimal health or expensive urine? It's a legitimate question. And I want to take you through some of these by posing 4 questions. I want to try to cut through the confusion that has been caused. Here's the key questions. Do we really need to supplement? That's an important question. Is it safe? Is it effective? And what makes a quality supplement? Now we highlighted those the other night. I'm going to dive into that in a little more detail. With regard to the first question, why do we need to supplement? Well, the fact of the matter is, if we lived in a perfect world and had a perfect diet, we probably wouldn't need to supplement. But the changes that have taken place in our world, in our modern world over the past 100 years with commercial agriculture, has left us with a paucity of nutritional supplements in the standard diet. Most of us do not eat a diet that is balanced enough and has enough of the required vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and plant-based nutrients to provide us with protection for long-term health. So it's important that we supplement that diet with good quality supplements in order to ensure that we can protect ourselves. I want you to look at the following statement. This statement was made, let's read through it. The alarming fact is that fruits, vegetables, and grains that are now being raised on millions of acres of land that no longer contain enough of certain nutrients are starving us, no matter how much we eat of them. Now that's a U.S. Senate document 264. The amazing thing about this document is when it was written. 5 years ago? Maybe 10? Well, actually it was written in 1936. For over 80 years we've recognized that we no longer have the nutrient value in our fruits, in our vegetables, in our commercially raised foods to provide us with the nutritional tools for long-term health. Over 80 years ago we recognized that we are increasingly confronted with what is called multiple micronutrient deficiencies. And from that is the genesis of degenerative disease. The calculus is simple. If the nutrients are not in the soils, then they're not in the plants grown from the soils. If they're not in the plants grown from the soils, they're not in our bodies. Depleted topsoils equals depleted foods. Here's a graph. This is data taken from the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, and it shows you the degree of multiple nutrient deficiency in the soil content, in the arable soil content, in many of the different countries. In North America, depletion by 85%. In South America, 76%. Same in Asia. In Africa, 74%. And in Europe, 72% depletion. Our soils are rapidly losing their ability to support good health because they're rapidly losing the micronutrients that your body needs in order for proper cellular function. 85%, and that was back in 1992. Since the beginning of the century, so less than 100 years, 85% of that mineral content has been lost. Well, depleted foods makes for depleted bodies. We talked, Dr. Wentz talked the other night at length about soil erosion from overcultivation, how we cultivate our crops and use high-intensity agricultural practices today is much different than how we grew our foods 100 years ago. This process of high-yield extraction virtually depletes the soil, and virtually exhausts the soil. And then, when the soils can no longer sustain the plant growth, healthy plant growth, we throw on the chemical fertilizers, the nitrate, phosphate, potassium fertilizers that really were left over from the armaments of the Second World War. They grow great vegetables, but those vegetables, while they look good, are deficient in many of the important micronutrients that your body needs. Also, when we do this, the fertilizers, the chemical fertilizers, acidify the soil, and they increase the susceptibility of those soils to pests. And as a result of that, we then have to look at the application of pesticides and herbicides. Here's a study from Life Extension Foundation done back in 2001. And it looked at the loss of nutrient content in many foods. In this case, it's colored greens. And we can see that the vitamin C is reduced by 62%, the vitamin A by 41%. Calcium, potassium, and magnesium almost totally depleted in the magnesium, down 84%. You saw the same pattern happen to whatever food group they were looking at. Micronutrient deficiencies in all our foods. Well, the other fact of the matter is, as we well know, a slide in the upper right is a little shop in Taiwan that I took a picture of some young ladies looking at Dunkin' Donuts. It's worldwide. It's global. A global fast food, corporate food culture that relies on high levels of sugar, high levels of fat, often high levels of salt, all of the things that are not good for us. And as a result of that, high fat content, high sugar content, and at the same time, a paucity of those micronutrients that are needed for long-term health. And we just set ourselves up. We set ourselves up for degenerative disease because the level of oxidative stress in the body with those kinds of conditions becomes incredibly high. High fat, high sugar, combined with a low intake of the micronutrients sets the body up for oxidative stress. Now, we talked briefly about what oxidative stress was. Let's go into it in a little bit more detail because oxidative stress is one of the principal causes of aging. Free radicals are molecular fragments that are, chemically speaking, they're very damaging, they're very reactive, chemically reactive. Think of them as sparks from a fire, a living room fire, and if you don't protect that fire with a grate, the sparks will jump out, they'll burn holes in your carpet or in your hardwood floor. The same thing happens in the cell. If you don't protect the membranes of the cell and the organelles of the cell with the antioxidants, which are the grate that protects the fire, then those free radical sparks will also literally punch tiny little holes in the membranes of the cell. They will damage the components, the important biomolecules in the cell. And they set the individual cell up for a process which we talked about again called systemic inflammation. It's a little different than inflammation that you're used to, but it's very damaging. Systemic inflammation or silent inflammation is one of the principal causes of cellular aging, mainly by damaging the membranes of the tiny little organelle in the cell called the mitochondria that is responsible for energy production. Inflammation causes the body to respond by going through a whole cascade of inflammatory reactions. The body produces signaling molecules that are activated by oxidative stress, and these signaling molecules can actually turn on and turn off genes in the cell nucleus that increase the damaging catabolic reactions in the cell that accelerate cellular aging. Now, supplementation, if it's properly done, provides the nutrients that target these processes of oxidative stress and inflammation. That's really important to understand. The third one we talked about was glycation. And I related it to the browning of a duck or a turkey as you have it in the oven. That's not an oversimplification. That actually does happen in the body over a long period of time. Particularly if the body is in a state of chronic sugar overload, hyperglycemic, which is often the case with the diets we have today. This cross-linking of proteins with the sugars, the excess sugars, the excess fats in the diets, sets us up for the aging process, the development of liver spots, the yellowing of the cornea of the eyes and the teeth, the stiffening of ligaments and joints. These are the process of aging. Well, here's the next question. But before we get to that, let's just quickly summarize. Oxidative stress, inflammation, and glycation. These are three primary drivers of the aging process. They're also three primary drivers of the onset of many, many degenerative diseases that are so prevalent in our world today. So let's look at supplementation from the safety aspect. Is it safe? Because the last thing you want to be doing is taking a supplement for the rest of your life and finding out it's actually harming you rather than helping you. Well, this is interesting. I pulled this from the 2004 annual report of the American Association of Poison Control Centers. See if you can answer this question. There were fewer deaths in 2004 caused by dietary supplements than caused by, I don't know, anybody? Drugs? Anti-inflammatories? No. How about air fresheners? Fewer deaths caused by the intake of nutritional supplements than were actually caused by air fresheners. Do you know that in the United States there's more people killed every year, accidental death caused by taking pharmaceutical products as prescribed? Each year there are twice as many people killed taking pharmaceutical drugs than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. So let's put it on a risk management perspective, on a level from 1 to 10. We see that on the one hand, natural health products, vitamins, minerals, herbal products, are very low risk. Over 10 years, there was only one accidental death, and that was from taking too much iron. It was an iron overload death. It was the individual took too many iron tablets. On the other hand, over-the-counter painkillers, like aspirin, for example, ibuprofen. There's about 16,500 deaths in the U.S. each year from taking those prescriptions. When you get into pharmaceutical drugs, each year, the annualized death rate is about 106,000 per year. So you put it on that perspective, and you see that the risk of having a harmful reaction from supplements is much, much lower. Well, the real safety issue is how supplements are made, because less than a third of the U.S. supplements that are manufactured in the United States have a level of safety that's actually supported by the evidence. There's so much contamination, adulteration of products, and mislabeling that's common, not only in the United States, but in many other jurisdictions in the world. And that is why adherence to pharmaceutical manufacturing practices, or pharmaceutical GMPs as we call them, is absolutely essential. This is where the rubber meets the road in terms of product safety. Here's a study done, that was a Canadian study done at Trent University a few years back, looking at lead content in different brands of calcium supplements. And we see that these natural calcium products like bone meal, unrefined calcium, dolomite, as compared to refined calcium products, which are the pharmaceutical calcium products, the level of lead in those products, magnitudes higher. And when you look at the acceptable level of 1 microgram of lead for every 800 milligrams of calcium, we see that only the refined calcium product is under that line. The rest of the products are significantly higher in terms of lead content. Now, if you're taking a calcium product every day for the rest of your life, you don't want to be also taking in high levels of lead or arsenic or maybe some other surprises. That's why pharmaceutical manufacturing is so important. It's absolutely essential. Validation of all the raw materials that go into that nutrient, written records at all phases of production, and testing for dissolution, for disintegration, for stability, for shelf life, for microbial contamination, for identity, for purity, for potency. Test, 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 and more test. That's the difference between food grade and pharmaceutical grade. There's no shortcuts here, friends. There's no shortcuts. Here's a X-ray photograph of a substandard calcium tablet. Actually, there's 6 of them there that have failed to disintegrate. Now, this is 3 days after that individual took those tablets. You can see them in the screen, those little white dots. Now, often, when they come out the other side, the nurses can even read the label still on the tablet. They call them bedpan bullets. That's what happens when a product doesn't disintegrate. The body can't use it. So disintegration is very, very important. You only get that by manufacturing at pharmaceutical grades, because how a product is manufactured is every bit as important. Certainly it is in our criteria when we assess products, is how a product is, what is actually in that product. Manufacturing quality, every bit as important. Pharmaceutical GMPs are the only way to ensure safety and purity. They're the only way to ensure that what is on the label is actually in the bottle. No surprises. Well, next question. Is supplementation effective? I mean, if the goal of supplementation is to increase healthy lifespan, avoid degenerative diseases, we should have a look at them in terms of whether this actually occurs. Now, have a look at this. This is the death rates of disease category, the 6 major killers. And I've done it by country: United States, Canada, Colombia, Mexico, China, the different colors. We can see heart disease, cancer, respiratory disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, and diabetes. These are the 6 major killers. And the interesting thing, the good news about this, is they're all lifestyle related. And because they're lifestyle related diseases, they are almost entirely preventable with good diet. Let's look at that data another way. If you look at United States and Canada, you can see that about 80% of non-accidental death in these countries is caused from one of these 6 diseases, from a degenerative lifestyle-related disease. Colombia, Mexico, China, slightly lower. They have higher death rates for other causes. But we can see that the majority of people that die, non-accidental deaths, are dying from degenerative diseases, no matter where you look in the world. I want to look at 2 diseases quickly. I want to look at cancer. I want to look at heart disease, and I want to show you just a few of the studies to show you the effectiveness. We're going to look at 2 nutrients, vitamin D and iodine, and we'll show some of the studies that verify the efficacy of these 2 simple nutrients, neither of which are prevalent in our diet, and how by supplementing with these 2 nutrients we can avoid so much of the risk of these diseases. Cancer, for example, there's over 2,500 studies that confirm vitamin D is protective against all cancers. The risk of prostate cancer in men, for example, with low vitamin D triples over that of men that have sufficient vitamin D. And another study done in Steroid Journal Biochemistry and Molecular Biology found that at 1,000 international units a day with vitamin D, if you supplemented 1,000 IU per day, you reduce your risk of dying of colorectal cancer by 50%. We're not talking about a pharmaceutical drug here, folks. We're talking about a very inexpensive natural supplement. Those are powerful numbers, powerful numbers. Let's look at a little more. This was a double-blind 4-year placebo-controlled clinical trial. This is the gold standard for scientific evidence. This study was done in postmenopausal women. And they found if they gave those women 1,500 milligrams per day of calcium and 1,100 international units of vitamin D, that the risk of those individuals dying from all cancers was reduced by more than 2/3. A huge drop. In fact, the authors of that study say that vitamin D may in fact be the most effective means of preventing all cancer, period. Done back in 2007. Boy, that's powerful information, isn't it? What about breast cancer? Looking at reducing lifetime risks, we see that the element iodine, a simple element, but very important element in our diet, kills cancerous cells by actually encouraging them to commit cellular suicide or apoptosis. Breast cancer patients, we find breast cancer patients are very deficient in iodine, and that if you supplement with iodine, your risk of breast cancer or other breast-related diseases reduces substantially. Iodine, in fact, has been found to inhibit cancer promotion by actually regulating, turning on and turning off genes that are involved in cellular growth and cellular function. Iodine, extremely important in breast health, and that's 50% of you guys out there. This was an interesting statement. There is a single putative factor protective against breast cancer, one that is fat-soluble and is diminished by high-fat intakes, and the depletion of which is responsible for the vast majority of cases. A report, study done in the Journal of Epidemiology back in 2000, and that element, the authors contend, is the element iodine. By simply ensuring you have sufficient iodine in your diet, you can reduce your risk of breast cancer very significantly. Back to heart disease, if we look. Vitamin D, we see that vitamin D deficiency increases the incidence. If you don't have enough vitamin D, you increase the incidence of hypertension and of having elevated triglycerides, which are a significant risk factor. Another study showing that vitamin D reduces C-reactive protein. CRP is a risk marker for cardiovascular risk. If you have high levels of this protein in your blood, your chance of dropping dead with a heart attack is pretty significant. Vitamin D reduces that. Low vitamin D status, in fact, increases the risk of heart attack in a graded manner. In other words, the lower your vitamin D, the higher is your risk of dying of heart disease. That study done just a few years ago. Well, let's look at another one. Antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties of the element iodine have been found to be very important in heart health. Iodine deficiency. If you're deficient in iodine, and many of us are, it decreases the contractile function in your heart. It increases vascular resistance, so it can lead to hypertension, and it creates dangerous cardiac arrhythmias where you just suddenly, your heart just starts to flutter and you keel over. By simply supplementing with sufficient iodine, you can reduce your risk of these diseases. Well, that's pretty powerful evidence. Pretty powerful evidence. Look at a couple more. Iodine deficiency is associated with atherosclerosis, formation of plaques in the arteries, with endothelial dysfunction, the lining of the blood vessels, and elevated blood homocysteine, which is a marker for oxidative stress in the body. Dietary repletion with iodine, in fact, reverses these multitudinous risk factors for cardiovascular disease. There's a number of studies that verify this. These are not drugs, folks. These are nutritional supplements. So if we're looking for proof, it's right in front of us. Okay, let's go on to the next one because my time's getting short. What makes a quality supplement? That's a really important question. We touched on it the other day. I want to try to dive into that a little bit more. A quality supplement has to be targeted to these major factors for accelerated aging, reducing oxidative stress, reducing the process of systemic inflammation in the body, this complexing of the sugars and the proteins that we get. A good quality nutritional supplement also has to target the process of detoxifying the body to get rid of many of these chlorine organophosphate derivatives from the pesticide-laced foods that we often eat, and to cleanse the body of many of the heavy metal toxins that are also in our environment. It also has to be targeted to combating the processes of cellular aging. Well, moving quickly, they have to be broad spectrum. What do I mean by that? They have to include a whole range of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. Why? Because the secret to supplementation is this. Supplements work best when they work together. It's a process called biochemical synergy. It's not like a drug where you take a single drug to target a specific physiological response. We need to have them working together. Balance As Dr. Wentz talked about with calcium and magnesium, for example, they have to be balanced. Complete, broad spectrum, and they have to be synergetic. And the levels of some of the nutrients we know have to be well above the recommended RDAs, because in many cases people need much higher levels of these nutrients if they have particular genetic variations that leave them vulnerable to certain disease processes. So we need high levels of these nutrients in order to combat that. The nutrients have to be bioavailable, and they have to be targeted to detoxifying the body. That's a quality supplement. And don't forget, they have to be manufactured to pharmaceutical GMPs. I've seen a lot of supplements out in the market that look pretty darn good, but when you really start to kick the tires, you find out that they're food-grade supplements, and often when you evaluate the contents that are actually in the bottle, you'd be surprised at the fact that many of these nutrients are not even there, or are only there in a whiff of an amount. They have to be quality tested, purity, potency, and the absence of contaminants. Wow, that's a pretty tall order. Quality comes down to this. It means doing it right from the get-go, right from the start. As Henry Ford said many years ago, quality means doing it right when nobody else is looking. Many ways to cut corners when you're manufacturing supplements. Quality research, quality formulations, quality products. That's the name of the game when it comes to quality supplementation. Now, we've looked at products in many marketplaces. Canada, United States, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand. We're in Colombia, in South America now, researching products there. Wherever we have researched these products, we have found that USANA's essentials formulation, while they do change from country to country, as was explained by Dr. Wood yesterday, that they do change from country to country. But wherever we go, we see that the essentials is truly a market-leading product. It's just head and shoulders above the other products out there. And that, friends, speaks highly of the quality. It speaks highly of the quality of the product. It speaks highly of the quality of this company. Because I know from my experience that the R&D folk at USANA in Salt Lake City are always ahead of the curve, looking at the new research as it's coming out, trying to make sure that those formulations are absolutely spot on. And that's why we've recognized that in our recent publication of the Comparative Guide, which is now in its 5th edition, and the Consumer Guide. The Consumer Guide, we recognize the essentials as being our editor's choice for product excellence, and also demonstrating the excellence of this company in Canada, in the United States, in Mexico, in Australia, and New Zealand, 3 years running. That's quality, folks. And that's why we've recognized this company with respect to our Editor's Choice Award in the guides. This is the USANA difference. It's quality you can trust every time. Now, I hope when you go home today, you've got some specific answers to those 4 questions that we addressed. Because if you do, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to talk to others about the quality of these products. Hey, I didn't even sneeze. That's pretty cool. Thanks. Have a great day.